Hi there. I'm Matt Borneman, Principal Research Scientist with career.place. Job profiling is the art of breaking down the job into components that distinguish the top performers from those who aren't qualified, and it generally proceeds along three key steps. First is identifying minimum qualifications. Those are the things that are required day one coming into the job. Next is defining the required traits and characteristics that distinguish the top performers from those who will be less successful. The third step is measuring those key job-related skills critical to success on the job, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And although there are a lot of ways to measure skills, we're going to focus on work samples, which are exactly what they sound like. Samples of the sorts of tasks and behaviors that will be performed on the job. Things like asking a programmer to write a short program, or asking an accountant to do some light accounting work. So why are we focusing on work samples? Well, there are three key reasons. The first is that by focusing on work samples, you can measure relevant skills. You're going to be asking your candidates to perform the exact sorts of tasks they will be performing on the job. Secondly, you can evaluate them relative to your specific standards. And this really gets at the fit. You want to make sure that how the candidate does their work and how they respond fits with what you're looking for in your organization and your team. The third reason, and probably the most important, is that work samples are very highly predictive of success on the job. Obviously, the best way to measure how well someone will perform the job is to have them actually perform the job. We're going to be talking about two types of work sample questions today. And we'll start by talking about job tasks. What are job tasks? Well, they're simulations of common and important tasks the candidate will encounter on the job. These are the sorts of things you find in the duties section of the job description. So imagine that you're hiring for an HR analyst role. This is a role that's going to be seated within talent acquisition. It's a bit more of an advanced position requiring some advanced HR and statistical training. So what we want to do is design the question to showcase those relevant skills. And you've got to have clear actual tasks in that question. For example, using the attached data set, calculate the pass rates for each gender and ethnicity, the adverse impact ratios for each protected class, and conduct an appropriate statistical test for differences in pass rate. Our next tip is to talk about setting expectations for your candidates. Be clear about what you're expecting from them. If you're only looking for a few paragraphs as a writing sample, communicate that so the candidate knows not to overwrite. Conversely, if you're expecting a lengthy response to your question, communicate that as well so the candidate knows to budget time appropriately. Letting candidates know about the expectations of what you're asking for and a realistic time estimate for completion allows them to budget their time when applying and helps ensure you get a steady flow of quality, serious candidates. Going back to our question, we've helped set up the expectations by asking them to use formulas and upload a spreadsheet and briefly provide the interpretation of their findings. Now we want to give you a sneak peek of the career.place app and how you can set expectations within there. Not only can you use formatting to highlight things you want to point out to the candidate, but you can also set time estimates for how long you would expect their answer to take them to do. Our next tip is to set expectations for your hiring team by taking the time to predefine what the best and worst answers are to your questions before asking candidates to respond. You establish that there will be a range of responses and that your question will be able to distinguish those likely to be high performers from those who will not make the cut. Additionally, this helps calibrate and train your raters to remove bias in their evaluation. By providing a common frame of reference of what's a good versus a bad answer, you keep everyone evaluating the responses to your questions on the same page. In turn, this helps ensure that the raters are evaluating the candidate's responses consistently and reliably, which reduces unconscious bias and leads to a more defensible process. Here we've got examples of what would be a bad response, like failing to calculate the results, what would be a good response, providing accurate stats and interpretation, and what the requirements for the best response would be, including things like discussing legal impact and the need for validation. Popping back into the career.place app, we have a confidential section where you can provide notes for your team. This is not seen by candidates and is only seen by your review team when evaluating the responses. Our next tip is to provide candidates with everything they need, and it's your responsibility to do this. For example, if the work sample requires the candidate to complete some data analysis and interpretation, you can't require the analysis be conducted in an expensive and proprietary program. This is biasing against individuals who can't afford the program and may even encourage software piracy. However, it is reasonable to assume candidates have access to freely available tools and software. For example, if a calculator is required, you don't need to provide one, as nearly all modern computer devices have a calculator as part of the software package. Again, popping back into the career.place app, we can provide tools like via attachments. For this particular question, we need to attach a data set, and we can do so here. But that data set is in a Microsoft Excel format. And we've also provided candidates with free alternatives if a candidate does not have access to those programs. Our next tip is to avoid asking them to do real work. Asking candidates to complete a sample of work that's representative of the work done on the job is fantastic. It will provide you with excellent data about their abilities. However, it's inappropriate to ask candidates to complete actual work that contributes to your company's bottom line. Not only are there ethics concerns in asking candidates to do real work for you for free, but this may expose you to legal risk regarding unfair labor practices. As such, it is best to focus on representative work samples that are not directly related to the work performed at your company. Our next tip is to be considerate with candidate time and effort. One of the key aspects of the candidate experience is to have a screening process that is reasonable relative to the position to which the candidate is applying. While it may be reasonable to expect applicants to an advanced position to spend quite a bit of time on the application, candidates will expect to spend less time applying for entry-level jobs. So ask the questions you need to make informed and unbiased decisions on serious candidates, but consider the attractiveness of your position, organization, salary, etc., to ensure that serious candidates will be willing to go through your application process. Now we're going to move on to talking about situational questions. What are situational questions? Well, they ask about either past situations or hypothetical future scenarios. For this, let's use an example of a customer service rep position. This is going to be an entry-level position with a large organization. And what you should do is focus on the candidate's approach to that situation and what they would do next. For example, we have a question here. You are speaking with a customer who had previously made a request. Another customer service rep promised that it would be taken care of, but did not follow through. The customer is angry and complaining to you about the other CSR. How do you handle this situation? Now, whether you ask about past behavior or a hypothetical scenario, you should tie the questions into common situations faced at work. This allows you to gather information about how candidates will behave at work in circumstances similar to what they will routinely face. Doing this also reduces any legal risk with making hiring decisions. If there ends up being adverse impact against any protected group, it's imperative that you demonstrate the job relatedness of your question. By keeping all your questions job-related from the outset, you not only gather better data on the candidates, but reduce your legal risk as well. Our next tip is to ensure your questions have a range of possible responses. If everyone gives the same response to your question, how are you going to distinguish which candidate should move on in the process? Make sure your questions have a range of possible answers, including some that are ideal and some that aren't acceptable. This helps you make the most of your investment in evaluating your candidates. And of course, when writing situational questions, be sure to follow the relevant job task tips as well, like providing candidates with their tools, avoiding real work, and being mindful of the application time. So we've talked about job tasks and situational questions today, and let's do a quick recap of the tips we've provided you, like asking work-based questions, setting expectations for your candidates, predefining the rating guide for your rating team, providing all the tools needed, avoiding having candidates do real work, and being mindful of the candidate's time. And now let's just pull this all together and do a quick demo of how to set up a work sample question in the career.place app. Once you've created your job, go to the Homework tab, click the Edit button, and click Add Question. And here you can start filling everything in. Up here is where you write your question. Here's where you can upload any attachments necessary. Here you can set your expectations regarding time and the length of response. You can provide confidential notes to your hiring team here, and then repeat that as necessary. That's how easy it is to set up a work sample question. So now I'd like to open it up to any questions.